Some nights it isn't your thoughts that keep you awake. It's the feeling that everything has already been decided. The world feels structured, categorized, explained. Every question seems to have an answer somewhere. Every mystery appears to be mapped, measured, stored. And yet, something in you does not rest. You may not even feel anxious. You may not feel overwhelmed. It's subtler than that. It's the quiet pressure of solidity, the sense that everything is already defined, what things mean, how they work, where they stand. Even your own life can start to feel outlined in permanent ink. Roles, responsibilities, interpretations, conclusions, and when everything feels fixed, the body tightens without announcing it. The breath becomes slightly shallow. The mind scans for space but finds none, not because the world is loud, but because it feels firm. We live in an age that explains beautifully. We can trace the birth of stars. We can map the structure of the brain. We can model invisible particles and predict distant storms. Knowledge has become precise, elegant, astonishing. It gives us orientation. It gives us power. It gives us extraordinary clarity. But clarity has weight. When everything is clear, it can feel as though nothing is allowed to soften, as though each idea must hold its shape, as though every position must remain defended. Even inside your own thoughts, there can be an invisible rigidity. This is how it is. This is what it means. This is who I am. On nights like this, sleep does not resist you out of restlessness. It resists because nothing is moving. The world feels still in the wrong way, not fluid, but frozen. Tonight's story is not here to dismantle knowledge. It is not here to challenge science, nor to dismiss understanding. It is not here to replace one certainty with another. Instead, it offers something quieter, a gentle shift from solidity to softness. There is a difference between knowing something and gripping it, between understanding the world and holding it tightly in place, between clarity and fixation. You do not need to reject explanations in order to rest. You do not need to abandon curiosity. You do not need to decide that the world is unknowable. You only need to loosen the sense that everything must remain exactly as defined. Imagine the difference between ice and water. Both are real. Both are valid. Ice has structure. It holds shape. It can be measured and touched and described. Water flows. It adapts. It moves around what stands in its way. Much of modern life celebrates ice, stability, structure, precision, fixed meanings. These are not wrong. They are useful. But the human heart does not sleep well in a frozen world. Long before modern laboratories and telescopes, there were other kinds of inquiry. Quiet ones, inward ones. Observations not of particles, but of suffering. Not of galaxies, but of the restless mind. These traditions did not attempt to describe the universe in equations. They asked instead, why does the human being cling? Why does certainty become heavy? Why does definition turn into confinement? Tonight we will gently explore that edge, not to debate, not to compare systems, but to notice something subtle, the difference between solidity and fixation. A mountain can be solid without being rigid in your mind. A theory can be precise without becoming a prison. A belief can guide you without hardening into armor. If the world has felt heavy lately, it may not be because it is complicated. It may be because it feels settled, closed, already concluded. Sleep comes more easily in an open world, As you lie here now, you do not need to resolve anything. You do not need to refine your worldview. You do not need to reconcile science and spirituality, logic and mystery, certainty and doubt. Those conversations can continue tomorrow. They can continue for generations. They do not require your vigilance tonight. Instead, simply notice the feeling of solidity. Where does it sit? In the jaw? In the chest? In the way the mind keeps outlining and defining? And then, without forcing anything, allow a small possibility. What if nothing is as fixed as it feels? Not in a dramatic way, not in a destabilizing way, just gently, quietly, like ice beginning to sense the warmth of surrounding water. There is no need to melt everything, only to soften the edges. The world can remain intelligent, it can remain intricate, it can remain beautifully explained, but it does not have to feel hardened. Tonight we begin not by dismantling the world, but by loosening it. Not by denying knowledge, but by letting it breathe. Not by rejecting clarity, but by allowing space around it. You are not here to solve the universe. You are here to rest inside it. And rest comes more easily when nothing insists on staying fixed. In the last century, the human mind has learned to look at the world in astonishing ways. We have learned how to measure what cannot be seen, to calculate what cannot be touched, to trace the birth of stars and the structure of atoms. The scientific gaze is patient and disciplined. It asks careful questions. It tests. It repeats. It refines. It does not settle for impressions. It seeks patterns that remain stable under observation. This way of looking has given us extraordinary gifts: medicine that saves lives, technology that connects continents, models that predict storms before they arrive. Science does something deeply reassuring. It shows that the world is not random chaos. There are regularities, there are laws, there are relationships that can be discovered. In many ways, science softens fear. When lightning becomes electricity, when illness becomes biology, when the movement of planets becomes gravitational equations, mystery turns into structure. The unknown becomes intelligible, and with intelligibility comes a sense of orientation. We know where we stand. But this orientation has a particular character. It depends on clarity, on definition, on isolating variables. To understand a phenomenon, science often separates it from its surroundings. It asks, what is this thing? How does it behave under controlled conditions? What remains constant when everything else is removed? This method is powerful precisely because it narrows, it brackets out what cannot be measured. It does not ask whether a discovery feels meaningful. It does not ask whether a theory brings peace. It asks whether it works, whether it predicts, whether it corresponds with observation. And there is a quiet honesty in that restraint. Science does not claim to answer questions it is not designed to answer. It does not declare what is ultimately good or how a human being should live. It does not prescribe compassion. It does not measure sorrow in a way that exhausts its depth. It can describe neural correlates of grief, but not the felt texture of losing someone you love. In the final chapters of many reflections on science and spirituality, this distinction becomes important, not to diminish science, but to clarify its scope. When we expect science to give us existential comfort, we may be asking it to do something outside its method. When we expect it to declare ultimate meaning, we are moving beyond its instruments. The scientific worldview is often described as objective. It seeks what is valid regardless of who observes it. If a law holds, it holds everywhere. This universality is part of its beauty. The same equations describe falling apples and orbiting moons. The same chemistry governs distant galaxies and the cells in your body. Yet the human experience is not entirely objective. Your fear at night is not a universal constant. Your longing, your regret, your hope, these are not easily reduced to formulae. They are lived from within. There is a subtle tension here. On one side, a world that can be mapped with increasing precision. On the other, an inner life that does not feel fully captured by maps. Both are real, both are valid, but they operate in different registers. When science speaks of reality, it often speaks in terms of structure, fields, forces, particles, systems. It tells us that what appears solid is composed of dynamic processes, that what seems continuous is made of discrete interactions. Even matter itself, under closer inspection, is less rigid than it appears. At microscopic scales, solidity gives way to probability, interaction, relation. This is not mysticism, it is careful observation. And yet, when we hear that the world is less solid than it looks, something interesting happens. The very discipline that feels precise begins to reveal fluidity. What we thought was fixed turns out to be relational. What seemed isolated turns out to be interconnected. Still, science does not leap from this to spiritual conclusions. It does not say, therefore you should let go. It does not say, therefore you will suffer less. It simply describes, and that description can sometimes feel cool, neutral, detached, not unkind, but impersonal. The equations do not care whether you sleep well tonight. The data does not bend to comfort you. It stands, clear and steady, waiting to be understood. On nights when the world feels hardened, it may be because we have absorbed this tone of clarity without noticing. We begin to see everything as something to define, even ourselves. We analyze our feelings. We diagnose our patterns. We categorize our reactions. We try to solve our restlessness as if it were a technical problem. There is intelligence in that impulse, but there is also fatigue. Science excels at explaining how things work. It is less concerned with how it feels to be the one who is working, striving, understanding. It can illuminate the mechanisms of sleep, but not the quiet surrender that allows sleep to come. None of this is a criticism. It is simply a recognition of boundaries. A telescope does not fail because it cannot taste sweetness. A microscope does not fall short because it cannot describe love. Each instrument has its domain. As you rest here now, consider the possibility that much of what feels solid in your life comes from this habit of structuring, defining, stabilizing. It has helped you survive. It has helped humanity flourish, but it is not the only way to relate to reality. The scientific gaze teaches us that the world is patterned and lawful. It also quietly teaches us something else. What appears solid may be more dynamic than it seems. Even the hardest materials, at another scale, are movements and relations. You do not need to master these ideas tonight. You do not need to hold quantum theories in your mind. Simply allow this gentle suggestion. Solidity is often a matter of perspective, and perspective can soften. In the next part, we will turn toward a different kind of inquiry, one that did not begin with instruments aimed at the sky, but with attention turned inward, not to compete with science, but to illuminate another dimension of the same human experience. Long before telescopes traced the edges of distant galaxies, there were human beings sitting quietly, observing something closer, not the sky, not the atom, but the movements of their own minds. They were not asking what the universe is made of. They were asking why the heart feels restless, why desire tightens, why loss hurts, why even success does not settle the mind for long. This was a different kind of inquiry. It did not require laboratories. It required attention. It did not depend on measurement. It depended on direct experience. Where science isolates phenomena to understand structure, this inward path observed experience to understand suffering. In the Buddhist tradition, the starting point is simple and honest. There is dissatisfaction. Even in comfort, something unsettled remains. Even in achievement, something fragile lingers. This is not pessimism. It is observation, a recognition that the human condition includes instability. Rather than explaining the cosmos, this tradition examined attachment. What happens when we cling to what changes? What happens when we insist that something stay as it is? A pleasant moment, a belief, an identity, a certainty. The teaching that often emerges here is not that the world is unreal, nor that knowledge is meaningless. It is that everything is in process. Nothing stands alone. Nothing remains exactly the same from moment to moment. What feels fixed is actually part of a continuous unfolding. This idea is often summarized as interdependence. Every phenomenon arises in relation to others. A tree depends on soil, sunlight, water, time. A thought depends on memory, sensation, mood, context. Even the sense of self depends on countless conditions, language, history, body, environment. This is not far from what modern systems science observes in its own way, that complex realities are networks of relation, but the purpose here is different. The point is not to map the network, it is to loosen the grip. If nothing exists independently, then nothing can be held independently. If everything arises through conditions, then nothing can be secured permanently. This realization is not meant to frighten, it is meant to soften. In Buddhist reflection, suffering intensifies when we treat what is dynamic as if it were fixed, when we demand permanence from what is impermanent, when we construct a solid I and defend it against a flowing world. Notice how similar this feels to the sense of hardness we described earlier. The world feels heavy when everything seems settled, finalized, defined. The inward path suggests something gentle but radical. Perhaps nothing is as settled as it appears. Another key insight in this tradition is often translated as emptiness. But emptiness here does not mean void or nothingness. It means lack of independent, permanent essence. Things are not empty of existence. They are empty of fixed self-nature. They are relational, contingent, open. When you hear this softly, without philosophical pressure, it becomes less abstract. It means that your sadness tonight is not a permanent identity. It arises from causes and conditions. It will change. It means that your confidence is not a permanent possession. It too shifts with conditions. It means that even the sense of being a separate, solid self is more fluid than it feels. Where science describes interconnection through data and models, this inward inquiry invites you to feel it directly. The breath depends on air, air depends on trees, trees depend on sunlight, sunlight depends on processes in distant stars. You are not separate from the cosmos you might try to understand, but again, the purpose is not to construct a new worldview to defend. It is to reduce unnecessary suffering. When you see that experiences are conditioned and changing, you may hold them more lightly. When you see that identities are assembled from shifting elements, you may defend them less fiercely. In the final reflections of dialogues between Buddhism and science, a careful distinction is often made. Similar language does not mean identical meaning. When physics speaks of fields and relations, it is not making a spiritual claim. When Buddhism speaks of emptiness, it is not offering a scientific theory. The resonance is poetic, not literal. This honesty is important. It prevents us from forcing harmony where difference remains. It allows each approach to retain integrity. For the purpose of rest, what matters is something simpler. Both perspectives, in their own way, undermine rigid solidity. Science shows that matter is dynamic at its core. Buddhism shows that experience is dynamic at its core. Neither supports the idea of an absolutely fixed world, and yet neither demands that you abandon structure entirely. The tree still stands, the body still breathes, the laws of physics still function, the world remains coherent. The softening comes not from denial, but from recognizing process, from sensing that what feels hardened may be flowing beneath the surface. As you lie here, you do not need to grasp the philosophy. Just notice your own experience. A sound arises, it fades, a thought appears, it shifts, a sensation intensifies, it dissolves. Nothing stays long enough to become permanent. Even the feeling of solidity changes when observed gently. The inward path does not argue with science. It does not compete for authority. It asks a different question. If everything is changing and relational, how might you suffer less by holding it less tightly? Not by rejecting knowledge, not by refusing clarity, but by loosening the instinct to freeze what is in motion. In the next section, we will look at the space between these two ways of seeing, not to merge them and not to divide them sharply, but to rest in the tension that remains. When two ways of seeing the world stand side by side, there is a temptation to make them agree completely, to say they are saying the same thing in different languages, or to insist that one must replace the other. But in the careful dialogue between science and Buddhism, something more mature appears. They do not fully coincide, and they do not need to. Science asks, what is the structure of reality? Buddhism asks, why do we suffer within reality? These questions intersect, but they are not identical. One refines explanation. The other refines experience. One tests hypotheses. The other examines attachment. If we blur the difference, we lose the integrity of both. In the later reflections of thinkers who stand at this crossroads, there is a consistent caution. Resemblance is not equivalence. When physics speaks of relational fields, it does so mathematically. When Buddhism speaks of interdependence, it does so ethically and existentially. The words may echo, but their aims differ. And yet, there is something quietly beautiful about their coexistence. Science reminds us that the universe is not arbitrary chaos. There are patterns, lawful processes, astonishing coherence. Buddhism reminds us that even within this lawful universe, clinging to certainty generates distress. Here is where the tension becomes fertile. Science does not promise liberation from craving. Buddhism does not promise predictive equations. Each remains within its own domain. This restraint is not weakness. It is strength. It prevents overreach. It protects humility. On nights when the world feels hardened, part of the pressure may come from a hidden demand that everything line up perfectly, that explanation should satisfy the heart, that spiritual language should match scientific theory, that there should be a single unified answer. But maturity often means tolerating incomplete overlap, allowing difference without forcing resolution. The final chapter of many serious conversations about science and Buddhism does not end in triumph. It ends in openness. It suggests that dialogue is ongoing, that human understanding is still evolving, that neither tradition has finished speaking. There is something restful in that. The conversation does not require your conclusion tonight. It does not depend on your verdict. The universe is not waiting for you to settle the debate. Instead, notice what happens when you release the need for synthesis, when you allow science to illuminate structure without demanding comfort from it, when you allow Buddhism to illuminate suffering without demanding cosmological proof from it. The tension softens. Both perspectives, in their own ways, challenge rigidity. Science reveals that matter is less solid than it appears. Buddhism reveals that identity is less solid than it appears. But neither insists that you dissolve into confusion. They simply loosen certainty. It is possible to live in a world that is both intelligible and open, structured and fluid, lawful and changing. The discomfort arises when we try to freeze that fluidity into a final system. Perhaps the deepest resonance between these traditions is not a shared doctrine, but a shared humility. Science revises itself when evidence shifts. Buddhism encourages the practitioner to test teachings in lived experience rather than accept them blindly. Both, at their best, resist dogmatism. Dogmatism hardens, inquiry softens. As you rest here, consider how often the mind wants to declare something final. This is true, this is false, this is who I am, this is how the world works. These statements feel stabilizing. They create edges. They define territory. But edges can cut. Territory can become confinement. When the need for finality relaxes, something gentler emerges. Not ignorance, not confusion, simply openness. You do not need to choose a side tonight. You do not need to harmonize physics with philosophy. You do not need to conclude whether emptiness and quantum theory are comparable. Those are daytime inquiries. At night, the more important shift is inward. Can you allow the world to remain partially unresolved? Can you allow knowledge to stand without clinging to it? Can you allow spiritual insight to exist without turning it into doctrine? In this unresolved space, solidity begins to loosen. The world is not denied. It is not dismantled. It is simply not frozen. The dialogue continues across centuries. Scientists refine their models. Practitioners refine their awareness. Both move forward, adjusting, questioning, listening. Nothing is finished, and that unfinished quality is not a flaw. It is the condition of growth. As this understanding settles softly in you, notice the difference between a closed system and an open one. A closed system demands conclusion. An open system allows movement. Sleep comes more easily in an open system. In the next section, we will bring this reflection closer to home. From traditions and theories to the subtle ways solidity shows up in your own experience. Now we bring this closer, away from traditions and theories, and into the quiet interior of your own experience, because solidity is not only a philosophical idea, it is something you can feel. It appears as the thought that will not move, the belief that feels immovable, the story about yourself that has been repeated so often it seems carved in stone. This is just how I am. This is how things always go. This is what it means. Notice how these sentences carry weight. They close the field. They finalize. They harden. You may not think of this as suffering. It can feel like stability, like identity, like clarity. But sometimes beneath that stability, there is strain, because life does not stay fixed, even when our interpretations do. In the dialogue between science and Buddhism, one subtle warning emerges. Knowledge can become attachment, not because knowledge is wrong, but because we can grip it. The mind loves coherence. It loves solid ground. And so it builds frameworks about the world, about other people, about itself. Frameworks are useful. They allow navigation. They reduce chaos. But when they become rigid, they stop adapting. And life continues to change around them. Consider how often tension arises, not from events themselves, but from the gap between what is happening and what we believe should be happening. The world shifts, the body ages, relationships evolve, circumstances rearrange, yet inside a structure insists it should not be this way. This insistence is subtle solidity. Buddhist analysis would describe this as clinging, not dramatic grasping, but the quiet refusal to allow impermanence. Scientific analysis might describe the brain's tendency to stabilize predictive models. Both perspectives point to something similar. The mind prefers consistency. Consistency feels safe, but it can also become confinement. When everything must align with what you already believe, the world feels tight. When your identity must match yesterday's version of you, growth feels threatening. When explanations must remain intact, new experience feels disruptive. On nights when the world feels hardened, you may be sensing this internal rigidity. The body lies still, but the mind holds position. It defends interpretations. It rehearses conclusions. It tries to maintain the shape of things. What if nothing needs to maintain its shape tonight? Not your role, not your narrative, not your certainty. There is a difference between having a structure and being trapped inside it. A building can be sturdy and still have windows. A belief can guide you and still allow revision. An identity can feel coherent and still remain porous. The teaching of emptiness, when translated into lived experience, is not abstract philosophy. It is the recognition that what you take to be solid is composed of conditions. Your anger depends on fatigue, memory, expectation. Your confidence depends on feedback, health, context. Your sense of self depends on language, culture, relationships. When you see this gently, the solidity loosens, not because nothing exists, but because nothing stands alone. Science, too, shows us that what appears stable is often dynamic beneath the surface. At the level of particles, there is constant interaction. At the level of ecosystems, there is constant exchange. Stability is not absence of movement. It is balance within movement. Perhaps the same is true for you. The solidity you feel may not be a fixed block. It may be a temporary configuration, a pattern currently arranged in a particular way. Patterns can change. You do not need to dismantle your worldview tonight. You do not need to question everything. You only need to soften the insistence that things must remain as defined. Imagine holding a small stone in your hand. If you grip it tightly, the muscles strain. If you open your palm slightly, the stone still rests there. Nothing has been lost, but the tension dissolves. This is the shift from fixation to openness. The world does not disappear when you loosen your grip. Your knowledge does not vanish. Your identity does not collapse. What changes is the pressure, and pressure is often what keeps the mind awake. As you breathe now, notice where you might be gripping: a belief about tomorrow, a story about yesterday, an interpretation of someone's words. Without arguing with it, without forcing release, simply soften around it. Let it remain, but less tightly held. There is room for revision, room for change, room for the unknown to enter without threatening your structure. In this softening, solidity becomes flexibility, definition becomes possibility, and the world begins, almost imperceptibly, to feel less fixed. In the next section, we will lean further into this softening, not as an idea, but as a lived atmosphere. There is a moment, very small, when something that felt solid begins to shift, not collapse, not disappear, simply loosen. It can happen in the body first. A breath that drops a little deeper than the one before, a jaw that softens without being instructed, a thought that does not finish its usual sentence. The world has not changed. The laws of physics remain intact. The structures of your life are still there, but the grip around them eases. Often, solidity feels like certainty. This is how it is. This is what it means. Yet certainty is not the same as stability. Stability can move. It can adjust. Certainty resists movement. When certainty relaxes, the world does not fall apart. It becomes spacious. Imagine standing at the edge of the ocean at night. From a distance, the surface may look dark and still, but when you step closer, you notice that even the calmest sea is in motion. Small ripples, gentle currents, subtle tides responding to distant forces. What appeared fixed was always flowing. In the same way, the structures you hold, your understanding, your identity, your conclusions, may feel solid from afar, but up close they are patterns in motion. Thoughts influenced by memory, emotions shaped by context, beliefs adjusted by experience. Science tells us that even the hardest materials are arrangements of moving particles. Buddhism tells us that even the firmest sense of self is an arrangement of changing conditions. Neither statement is meant to destabilize you. Both quietly suggest the same softness beneath appearance. When you sense this, even faintly, the pressure decreases. You do not need to dismantle your beliefs. You do not need to question everything you know. Just notice that what feels fixed may be a temporary configuration, and temporary configurations do not require defense. The night does not demand a final position from you. It does not require you to hold the world in place. It does not insist that you define who you are before you fall asleep. Let the edges blur slightly. Let meanings breathe. Let conclusions rest without tightening around them. Nothing is being taken away. Something is simply becoming less rigid, and in that gentle softening, space begins to open. If you widen the view again, beyond your own thoughts, you begin to notice something remarkable. The universe itself is not a finished object. It is an unfolding process. Stars are born and dissolve. Galaxies drift. Space expands. Even what seems still is participating in motion too subtle to see. Modern cosmology does not describe a static cosmos. It describes emergence, evolution, transformation across unimaginable spans of time. What appears permanent at the human scale is fluid at the cosmic scale, and at the microscopic level, the same pattern repeats. Matter is not a block of solidity. It is interaction, probability, exchange. What feels dense to your hand is mostly space structured by relation. Stability arises from balance, not from frozen stillness. This does not make the world unreal. It makes it dynamic. When you let this sink in gently, something shifts. The hardness you feel in your own life may not be absolute. It may simply be a momentary arrangement within a much larger movement. Science reveals this without poetry. It does not romanticize flux. It measures it. It models it. It shows that what looks solid depends on forces in constant interplay. Buddhist thought approaches from another angle, but it notices the same rhythm. Conditions arise. Conditions pass. Nothing stands independently. Everything participates. You do not need to hold these frameworks in your mind tonight. Just sense the atmosphere they suggest. A world that is active, relational, unfolding, not chaotic, not unstable, simply alive in process. In such a world, fixation becomes less necessary. If everything is already moving, you do not need to push it. If everything is already relational, you do not need to isolate yourself within it. The night, too, is part of this unfolding. Your breath is part of it. Your thoughts are part of it. Nothing here is locked in place. The solidity you feel is a surface effect, like calm water hiding gentle currents beneath. And when you remember that currents exist, even the calm feels softer. Now bring this sense of movement back inside, not as theory, but as direct experience. Notice how a thought appears. It seems solid for a moment, complete, persuasive, defined. And then, if you do not interfere, it shifts. Another thought follows. The first dissolves quietly, without ceremony. The same is true of sensation. A tightness in the chest intensifies, then softens. A warmth in the hands rises, then fades. Even the feeling of I am thinking changes tone from moment to moment. There is no fixed edge you can locate and hold. When Buddhist teaching speaks of emptiness, it does not mean that nothing exists. It means that what exists does not exist independently or permanently. Each experience depends on conditions. When conditions shift, experience shifts. That is all. Emptiness, then, is not absence. It is openness. It is the absence of rigid essence. It is the quiet fact that nothing in your experience stands alone long enough to become immovable. If you listen closely to this night, you can sense it. The sound in the room is not one continuous block. It flickers, it varies, even silence has texture. It is composed of subtle changes. Your identity, too, is textured. You are not a single frozen self. You are a flowing constellation of memory, intention, sensation, perception, stable enough to function, fluid enough to change. Unfixed does not mean lost. It means unbound by permanence. When you allow this, even gently, a certain defensiveness eases. There is nothing solid enough to guard with tension. There is nothing permanent enough to freeze in place. You do not need to dissolve into abstraction. Just soften the assumption that something here must stay exactly as it is. Experience continues, breath continues, awareness continues, but without the insistence that any moment define the whole. In this openness, the mind begins to feel lighter, not because it has solved anything, but because it has stopped trying to preserve what is already in motion. Now let everything settle into a quieter rhythm. You do not need to analyze the movement of particles. You do not need to contemplate interdependence. You do not need to define emptiness. The ideas have already done their work. What remains is atmosphere. A world that is not fixed does not collapse. It breathes, it adjusts, it continues without your supervision. The same is true for you. Notice how the body already knows how to soften when it is not being directed. The shoulders lower slightly. The breath deepens without instruction. The mind, when not held in place, begins to drift naturally. When nothing must remain exactly as it is, there is less to defend. When no conclusion needs to be finalized tonight, there is less to rehearse. When identity does not require reinforcement, there is less to tighten around. Unfixed is not uncertainty in a frightening sense. It is openness in a gentle sense. It is the permission for things to remain in process. Even the great questions about reality, what is true, what is ultimate, what is final, can rest unfinished. Science continues its inquiry. Spiritual practice continues its inquiry. The dialogue remains alive. Nothing demands your resolution before morning. And here, in this room, in this moment, the only thing required is ease. Let the world soften at the edges. Let meanings blur slightly. Let the sense of solidity relax into something more fluid. You are not dissolving. You are not losing ground. You are simply allowing what is already dynamic to feel dynamic. There is nothing to hold in place, nothing to secure, nothing that must remain fixed in order for you to rest. And in that gentle permission, the night begins to carry you. When the world is understood as dynamic rather than fixed, something subtle changes in how we live. The conversation between science and Buddhism does not end in theory. It quietly turns toward responsibility, not moral pressure, but maturity. Science has given humanity immense power. We can alter genes. We can split atoms. We can design artificial systems that learn and respond. Our capacity to intervene in nature has expanded rapidly, and yet the question that lingers is not only what we can do, but how we hold what we can do. Knowledge without inner balance can become dangerous. Technology without reflection can accelerate harm. The final reflections in many dialogues between science and spiritual traditions point here. Progress outward must be accompanied by depth inward. This is not a rejection of science, it is an invitation to complement it. If the world is relational, as both systems in their own ways suggest, then actions ripple. If nothing stands alone, then choices are never isolated. The recognition of interdependence is not merely philosophical, it becomes ethical, but ethics, in this context, is not rigid rule-following. It is sensitivity. It is awareness that your well-being is entangled with the well-being of others, that the air you breathe connects you to forests, that the technologies you use connect you to distant labor and distant ecosystems, that your inner states influence your outer actions. When the mind is hardened, ethics can become harsh. When the mind softens, compassion becomes natural. Buddhist teaching often speaks of wisdom and compassion together. Wisdom sees that nothing is fixed or independent. Compassion responds to that insight by reducing harm and increasing care. They are not separate qualities. They arise from the same understanding. Science, too, requires humility, the willingness to revise, the acceptance that models evolve. At its best, it resists dogma. It listens to evidence. This humility mirrors, in a different register, the spiritual humility of recognizing impermanence. When both humility and compassion are present, maturity grows. You do not need to become a philosopher tonight. You do not need to solve global crises, but you can sense the quiet direction implied here. As solidity softens, defensiveness decreases. As defensiveness decreases, kindness becomes easier. If your identity is not frozen, you do not need to protect it fiercely. If your beliefs are not permanent monuments, they can be adjusted without panic. If the world is unfolding rather than locked, then your participation in it can be flexible. Maturity is not certainty, it is steadiness within change. Imagine standing on a boat in gentle water. The boat moves slightly with the tide. You do not demand that the sea become still. You adjust your balance. You respond. You remain attentive but relaxed. This is a different kind of strength, not rigidity, but responsiveness. In a rapidly advancing world, inner rigidity becomes brittle, but inner flexibility remains resilient. Science may continue to expand outward, discovering new structures and forces. Spiritual insight may continue to refine inward awareness. Both movements can coexist, and you tonight are not required to master either domain. You are only invited to embody their shared softness, openness, humility, responsiveness. Let your breath move without forcing it. Let thoughts come and go without insisting they settle. Let the body adjust on its own. Nothing here needs to be fixed for the future to unfold. Nothing here must be secured for the world to continue its motion. There is dignity in this quiet maturity, a steadiness that does not rely on freezing reality. And as this sense of gentle steadiness spreads through you, the mind becomes less vigilant, less guarded, less intent on holding structure. The world can continue evolving without your supervision, and you can rest within it. This is where we do not conclude. There is no final statement to deliver, no synthesis to announce, no doctrine to secure before sleep. Science continues its careful observations. Buddhism continues its careful introspection. The dialogue remains open, unfinished, alive, and that is enough. The world does not require a closing argument tonight. It does not need you to settle whether matter is ultimate or whether emptiness is foundational. It does not need you to harmonize perspectives or defend positions. Everything is already in motion. Stars continue their silent burning. Cells continue their quiet repair. Thoughts continue their subtle appearing and dissolving. The universe does not pause, waiting for your certainty. Notice how restful that is. If nothing must be finalized, nothing must be guarded. If nothing must be frozen, nothing must be defended. The mind can release its stance. There is no single frame that holds all reality at once. There is no ultimate map that eliminates mystery. Even the most refined scientific models are provisional. Even the most revered spiritual teachings are invitations, not prisons. Provisional does not mean fragile. It means open. Open systems adapt. Open conversations evolve. Open minds rest more easily than closed ones. Let the sense of openness spread gently now, not as an idea, but as a feeling, a slight widening behind the eyes, a softening across the chest, a breath that does not need to be measured or improved. Nothing is collapsing. Nothing is being taken away. The world is simply not fixed. Unfixed does not mean uncertain in a threatening way. It means not locked, not sealed, not finalized beyond movement. Even your understanding of tonight's reflections does not need to remain intact. You do not need to remember the distinctions. You do not need to preserve the comparisons. You do not need to carry the philosophy forward. It can dissolve as you drift. Let knowledge loosen into quiet awareness. Let awareness loosen into simple presence. Let presence loosen into rest. There is nothing to settle, nothing to hold in place, nothing that must remain exactly as it is. The conversation between science and spirituality will continue long after this night. Humanity will keep asking questions. New discoveries will arise. New interpretations will emerge. You do not need to attend that conversation now. You are allowed to step aside, allowed to let words recede, allowed to let meaning soften into rhythm. If the world is not fixed, then this moment is not fixed either. It is already passing, already changing, already becoming something gentler. And you do not have to manage that change. Simply let the sense of holding fade. Let the need to define fade. Let the impulse to conclude fade. The night does not demand explanation. It carries everything forward without requiring your effort. You can rest inside that carrying. Nothing needs to be finished. Nothing needs to be understood. Nothing needs to remain fixed. And as the words begin to step back, as language thins into sound, you may notice that listening itself can soften. There is less to follow, less to grasp, less to remain aware of. The voice can recede now. The movement continues on its own. You do not need to listen anymore. The words no longer matter. From here, the voice gently steps aside and the sound continues on its own. There is nothing to follow, nothing to understand, nothing you need to stay aware of. The rhythm you will hear now does not ask for attention. It does not guide or explain. It is simply sound, steady, and unhurried, continuing whether you are listening or not. You can allow awareness to fade completely, letting the sound remain in the background, carrying the night forward without effort.
Shano, Makamo 主